Nobody remembers exactly what song she was singing when it happened. That detail, the one you would expect to be the most documented, the most cited, the most central to any retelling, has been lost in the particular way that the most human moments lose their peripheral details while preserving their emotional core. People who were in that room on that night in the spring of 1969 remember what they felt. They remember the sound stopping and the silence that replaced it, and the way that silence had a texture unlike ordinary silence. They remember the moment Janis Joplin walked to the edge of the stage and held out a microphone toward a man sitting alone in the front row who had not, until that moment, moved at all. What they cannot agree on is the song. Some say it was Piece of My Heart. Some say it was Summertime, the Gershwin standard she had been performing with Big Brother and the Holding Company, and then carried into her solo work like a piece of furniture from a house she'd left but couldn't entirely leave behind. One person who was there, a musician who had come to watch rather than perform that night, and who had a professional's ear for set lists, believed it was a blues number she had been performing infrequently in those months, something she had heard in San Francisco years earlier and returned to when the mood of a room called for it. The disagreement about the song is not incidental. It is, in its own way, the point, because what happened that night was not about the music in the formal sense, not about specific notes or specific words. It was about something that happened between the music and the room, in the space where performance becomes something else, something that does not require a set list to be understood. His name, if anyone ever knew it, has not survived. He was older, old enough that in a crowd composed primarily of people in their 20s, he registered as an anomaly. He was sitting in the front row, which was unusual given that the front row of a Janis Joplin concert in 1969 was not a contemplative space. It was physical, loud, close to the amplifiers and the full force of a voice that made the air move differently than other voices made it move. People in the front row were usually there because they wanted that proximity, wanted to be inside the sound rather than merely hearing it. This man was not behaving like someone who wanted proximity to the sound. He was behaving like someone who needed to see something. He sat with his hands in his lap. He did not sing along, which in a Janis Joplin crowd was itself remarkable. He kept his eyes open and directed toward the stage with the focused attention of someone watching for something specific, waiting for something to happen that he had come a long way to see. And Janis Joplin from the stage, in the middle of a performance that by every account was already extraordinary, saw him. What she saw and what it meant to her is the question that the rest of this story circles around, the fragments that survive, in the memories of the people who were nearby, in the things Janus said in the days and weeks afterward form a shape, an outline of something true. This is the story of that night, and of what a man nobody can name taught Janis Joplin about the thing her own voice was for. Tio and Diarsten god hid Janis Westcarar Yengi Entio ko Siard. You have to understand where she was in the spring of 1969. She was 26 years old. She had been famous by the standards of the music world she inhabited for approximately 2 years, since the Monterey Pop Festival in June of 1967 had taken her from San Francisco phenomenon to national conversation. In those 2 years, she had left Big Brother and the Holding Company, formed the Kozmic Blues Band, recorded her first solo album, and toured with an intensity that left the people around her simultaneously awed and concerned. The concern was not always articulated directly. The people closest to her had learned how to hold two things simultaneously: their genuine admiration for what she was producing on stage and their genuine worry about what the producing was costing her off it. The power and the cost were connected, had always been connected, or perhaps the same thing viewed from different angles. What Janus was experiencing in those months was a particular form of creative uncertainty that is difficult to describe from outside it. The album had received mixed reviews. Critics who had responded to the raw San Francisco sound of her Big Brother years found the more produced Kozmic Blues Band material polished in ways that seemed to compromise the authenticity they had celebrated. Audiences were more forgiving, the shows were selling out, the performances were extraordinary, but Janis herself was the most demanding critic of the gap between what she was producing and what she felt she should be producing. She talked about this gap in interviews with an honesty that sometimes made her publicist visibly uncomfortable. She said the Kozmic Blues Band was full of excellent musicians. She said the problem was something harder to name, a quality of aliveness in the music that she had felt in certain Big Brother performances and that she was working toward and not yet finding. She said she could hear where she needed to get to. She could not yet hear how to get there. This is a specific and genuine creative anguish, and it does not resolve easily. And Janis Joplin was living inside it while simultaneously delivering performances that audiences received as among the most powerful they had ever witnessed. The external success and the internal searching were running in parallel, and the tension between them was audible to the people who knew her well enough to listen for it. She was also, in that period, thinking about permanence in ways she did not always share openly. She had turned 26 in January. 27 was coming. She was not morbid about it, not in any way that expressed itself dramatically. But people close to her noted a quality of taking stock in those months, a sense of someone adding things up and checking the sum against something internal. Into all of this walked the Kozmic Blues Band tour of early 1969, and with it one evening in spring, a concert at which an older man sat alone in the front row and waited for something to happen. Thi sko wchat nedht not supposed to be different from the others. The venue was mid-sized, the crowd was substantial, the Kozmic Blues Band was tight and professional, and Janis was giving everything she had from the first number. For the first 40 minutes or so, the show proceeded as shows in that period proceeded. Janis moved through the set with the focused intensity that had become her signature, the voice doing what the voice always did, making the distance between performer and emotion disappear, making the songs feel like confessions delivered in real time rather than performances delivered from behind craft. And then, somewhere in the middle of the set, Janis's attention shifted. She had been scanning the room the way she always did, not looking for anything specific, simply taking in the whole field of the room. And her eyes landed on the front row, on a man sitting alone. He was perhaps 60, perhaps older. He wore a jacket that was not the clothing of someone who attended rock concerts regularly, something between a dress shirt and a casual coat, the kind of thing that said he had dressed with a certain intention for the evening without being entirely certain what the occasion required of him. His hair was gray and neatly arranged, his hands were in his lap, and his face, turned up toward the stage, carried an expression that Janis would later try to describe and find she couldn't find the right words for. She said it was not all. She had seen all on faces in the front row, the particular open, slightly overwhelmed expression of someone encountering something larger than they expected. This was different. She said it was more like recognition, like someone seeing something they had been trying to find for a long time and not being entirely sure they deserved to find it. She kept singing, but something in her had shifted its attention entirely to that face in the front row. 2, maybe 3 songs later, she did something she had not planned to do. She walked to the edge of the stage, she lowered herself to one knee, and she held the microphone out toward the man sitting alone, not in the way performers hold microphones out toward the crowd, but directly, specifically, as if she were offering it to one person and not to anyone else. The crowd went quieter. The band kept playing for a moment and then dropped to a murmur of sustained chords. The room found itself in an unplanned stillness. The man looked at the microphone. Then he looked at Janis. His expression did not change dramatically. He simply looked at her the way he had been looking at the stage all evening, with the quiet, focused attention of someone who has come a long way for exactly this. He did not take the microphone. He did not speak. He simply held Janis's gaze, and Janis held his. And for a moment that several people in the room described as lasting longer than it possibly could have lasted by clock time, something passed between them that nobody standing close enough to see could adequately describe afterward. Then Janis pulled the microphone back. She stood. She looked at the band. She nodded once. And they picked the song back up from where it had dropped, and she sang the rest of it with something in her voice that had not been there before. A quality that one of the musicians described afterward as a kind of full permission. Thi sko du END, the last notes, the crowd, the lights coming up, the ordinary machinery of venue operations reasserting itself. The band came off stage. Janis came off stage and did not go immediately to the dressing room. She went to the side of the stage and stood there looking out at the dispersing crowd. She was looking for the man from the front row. Her road manager, who was present, later said he had not understood what she was doing at first. But she was standing still, scanning the room with a purposefulness that made him stay quiet rather than move her along. She found him. He was standing near the edge of the floor, not moving toward the exit, holding his jacket over his arm and looking toward the stage with the particular expression of someone who is not yet ready to leave a place. When Janus descended the stairs and moved toward him through the thinning crowd, he saw her coming and did not look surprised. He looked like someone who had been expecting this. They talked for approximately 20 minutes. The road manager gave them space, close enough to be present if needed, far enough not to hear. What he observed was two people in a conversation that had the quality of being entirely private, self-contained, as if a bubble had formed around them that the noise and movement of the room could not penetrate. Janus was listening more than she was talking, which those who knew her well noted as unusual. The man spoke quietly and steadily, and Janus stood with her full attention given to what he was saying. When the conversation ended, the man put on his jacket, nodded once, and walked toward the exit. He did not look back. Janus stood watching him go until he was through the door and out of sight. She did not explain what had been said. Not that night, not directly. But she said things in the days that followed to several different people that taken together form a picture. Uhech Jonas Sayide in the days after that concert was not delivered as a single explanation. It came out in fragments, appearing in the gaps between other topics, connecting themselves to things being discussed that seemed unrelated until the connection became clear. She told a friend that she had met someone at the show who had listened to music his whole life the way she had listened to music, not as entertainment, not as background, but as the thing that explained what everything else meant. She said he had told her that his wife had died the previous winter after a long illness, and that for the last year of her life, when she could no longer do most of the things she had been able to do, she had listened to music constantly. And that among the records she had listened to, Janus's recordings had been particular, had been the thing she put on when the pain was bad, because the voice had something in it that other voices did not have. He had not been able to describe it more specifically than that. Neither at first had Janus. But a musician who knew her well asked her directly, "What did it mean to you?" What he said. And Janus was quiet for a moment in the way she was quiet when she was actually thinking. Then she said something that this musician remembered for the rest of their life. She said, "I always knew the voice was for something. I just didn't always know what. I thought it was for the people in the room while I was singing. But he made me understand it was also for the people who weren't there. For the moments he couldn't be at. For the nights when the only thing that was still working was the music." She paused. Then she said, "That's a bigger job than I realized. And it's a better job. Teach care varsity on Bedini Chutia Chistrangiar did not, in any measurable way, change what Janis Joplin was doing. The Kozmic Blues Band continued. The shows continued. The searching continued. But the people who were close to her noted something they described in slightly different terms, but that pointed toward the same thing. They said she seemed more settled in the purpose of the work, even when she was not satisfied with the execution of it. They said she spoke about performing differently, with less anxiety about whether she was achieving what she was trying to achieve, and more of a sense that the achieving mattered beyond what she could see in any given room on any given night. Nick Gravenites, who had known her since the early San Francisco years, said she told him something in the summer of 1969 that surprised him. She said she had started thinking about the people who weren't at the shows, the people who were listening at home or in cars or in hospital rooms. She said she had been performing for those people all along without knowing it, and that now she knew it, which changed something about how it felt. Gravenites asked her what it changed. She said, "It makes it less lonely. Performing is lonely in a way people don't understand. You're giving everything to a room and the room gives back, but only while you're in it. Knowing there are other rooms, other moments you can't see, that's different. That's like the music is still going after you stop singing." She was 26 years old when she said this. She had less than 2 years left. Einen Otibir 1970, Verdi SBI recorded at Sunset Sound in Hollywood. Producer Paul Rothchild noted something about the way Janus was approaching the vocal performances. He noted that she seemed to be singing for a specific kind of listener, not the live concert audience that most rock vocalists imagine, but someone quieter, someone listening alone, someone for whom the song was not entertainment but something more fundamental. He did not know about the stranger in the front row. He was simply observing what he heard. He said she was singing to someone who needed it, not someone who wanted it, someone who needed it the way you need something that helps you get through a thing you can't get through alone. Me and Bobby McGee was recorded on October 1st, 1970. The vocal performance has been described by everyone who has analyzed it seriously as containing a quality that is difficult to name technically, something about the way the voice addresses the listener, not as a crowd, but as a single person, present and specific. Whether or not Janis was consciously thinking in that recording booth of an older man who had told her that his wife had listened to her records when the pain was bad, that is unknowable. Memory does not always present itself as memory when it is operating. It sometimes operates as instinct, as a way of doing something that was learned so long ago and integrated so completely that the learning is no longer visible. But the voice that came through those monitors was singing to someone who needed it, and it had to come from somewhere. The Manafaram The Front RW was never identified. He was someone's husband. He was someone who had made whatever arrangements were necessary to be at a rock concert in the spring of 1969, to sit alone in the front row, to watch Janis Joplin perform with the focused attention of someone who had come for a specific reason. And he was, in whatever small or large way these things operate, part of what ended up on tape at Sunset Sound 18 months later, part of what went to #1 and reached millions of people who heard in that voice something they recognized without being able to name. Janis Joplin died on October 4, 1970. She was 27 years old. Pearl was released in January 1971 and became the fullest expression of everything her voice had been building toward. An album that still, half a century later, sounds like it is being addressed to someone specific, someone who needs it. Someone sitting alone somewhere, in whatever the equivalent of a front row is when there is no stage and no crowd and only the music and the person listening to it. She said after that spring night in 1969, that's a bigger job than I realized, and it's a better job. She was right. It was both. And she did it with everything she had every time until the last recording and the last note and the tape that kept turning after she was gone. The stranger in the front row taught her something she had already always known. Sometimes that is the only kind of teaching that actually takes, the kind that names what was already there, that gives language to what was already operating. He came to the concert because his wife had found something in the voice that helped her through the worst of it. He left having given Janis something in return, the full understanding of what the voice was for. It was for the room. It was also for the room after the room, for the night after the night, for the person who was not there, who would hear it later, alone, in the dark, and find in it the specific thing they needed to make it through to the next morning. The stranger has no name in the historical record. He has no photograph, no place in the official telling of Janis Joplin's story. But he was there, and she saw him. And what passed between them in 20 minutes on a concert floor in 1969 became, in its quiet and unannounced way, part of the reason the recordings sound the way they sound, part of the reason they still work, part of the reason they still reach people in the specific, necessary way that Janis always wanted them to reach. Not as performance, not as spectacle, but as a voice that found you in the room you were actually in at the moment you actually needed it. She gave everything every time, and now she knew why. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.